This video is brought to you by Squarespace. From websites and online stores to marketing tools and analytics, Squarespace is the all-in-one platform to build a beautiful online presence and run your business. Welcome back, everyone. In this video, I want to talk about the idea of creative thinking. This is actually going to lead us into the next photo assignment that I'm working on. But I want to stop today and I want to talk a little bit about creative thinking because this is a really important approach to photography that a lot of people actually struggle with. A few months ago, I did a series of photo assignments around this idea of copying work. And what we did is we took still life images from the great Josef Sudek, and we actually tried to copy those as close as we could to the original pieces. There was a lot of really interesting work that people submitted, and the whole idea is that by copying, we're learning from the way somebody else thought. So what this involves is it's just a simple process of analyzing a photograph, trying to duplicate that scene, doing some images, looking at them, thinking, wait a minute, how are these different? And then you make adjustments, you move forward, you think you have a finished image. There's still a few things that are not quite right about it. So you rewind, you go back and you look at it again. But this whole process is simply just kind of a trial and error on looking at what somebody else has done. And we learn from that experience of copying. Now, I think there's a lot we can learn from copying. And I think especially early on in someone's creative development, it's a really good skill to just be in the habit of doing because you're taking something that's already been done that you enjoy, that you look up to, that you love, and you're learning how to do that by emulation. I do think that there's a dangerous side to that as you grow as a photographer and as you progress. If you're just going to copy work all the time and you never have anything original to say, then that kind of defeats the purpose of any creative type work for that matter. It could extend well beyond photography. It could be music. It could be writing. It could be dance. It could be theater, whatever that is. But creativity is something that we have to understand how to put our own ideas into something and how to develop those, and that's where you develop a voice in what you're doing. And so it's kind of the opposite of copying. I think creative thinking versus copying, these are two realms that can coexist, and I think that one has to have a certain amount of maturity and understanding to know how to get the most out of both of those sides in order to eventually have a skill level and a creative concept to produce something new. Let me be honest for a second. The word creativity is something that in the past has made me cringe at times, and I think it's because it gets overused and abused a lot, and people will use creativity or the word creative to describe something that may not actually be that. So I want to make it very clear what my definition here is of creative thinking. So when I was looking at definitions for creativity, there was a huge variation on what various sources would define it as, but I found one that I thought would work really well. So obviously one, the state or quality of being creative. Well, what does that mean? This is one I like, is number two, the ability to transcend traditional ideas, rules, patterns, relationships, or the like, and to create meaningful new ideas, forms, methods, interpretations, etc., originality, progressiveness, or imagination. So we're talking about making something new, and to put this in terms of photography, this could be a new way of seeing something. It could be, as I like to say, a new way of interpreting your subject, whether that's the composition, whether that's the materials, whether it's your subject, whatever that looks like in the end. So we basically have something that we are making, and there are two ways we can approach that. We've talked about the discipline of making something by copying something that's existing, which has a formula and a logic to it, because what we can do is we can compare to the original and we can make adjustments as we go along. So how do we learn by making something new through a process of creative thinking? If something new doesn't exist, it's up for us to invent. This is where it gets interesting. Is it even possible to teach creative thinking on any level? So this is what I want to break down and get into. But first, I want to give a quick shout out to our sponsor today, who are the awesome folks over at Squarespace.com. Present your photography using Squarespace's modern professional portfolios. The layouts are completely customizable, and you can use Squarespace's drag and drop based backend system, which is really easy to use to present your work the way that you want it seen. Squarespace is an all-in-one platform for building beautiful websites, easily claiming your domain or URL, and creating a custom site that brings your ideas to life. Squarespace is host to a number of other tools, including e-commerce, appointment scheduling, and analytics, so that you can grow your brand and your following. So head over to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, you can go to squarespace.com/AOP to save an additional 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Once again, that is squarespace.com/AOP, and I want to thank the folks at Squarespace for sponsoring another episode of The Art of Photography. I think that a good place to start would be to dispel a few myths about creativity. So the first one that I hear a lot of people say is that creativity is this kind of DNA trait that you either have or you don't. Like, so-and-so is so creative. Oh my gosh, I wish I were creative. I would love to be a creative person. First of all, I think that's a complete lie. I don't think that it exists that way at all. And I have said this for years in these videos. Creativity is a skill that you can learn like anything else. It's like learning how to understand math. It's like learning how to read. It's like learning how to write. Now, certain people probably have a better disposition at these things or maybe more natural talent than others, but it doesn't mean that you can't learn it yourself. But I think also, like anything else, it's something that is a skill that you have to be using a lot. Now, I can tell you from my own experience that when I go through periods of creative inactivity, that it's like not going to the gym. The first day you go back, it's really overwhelming and you don't feel creative at all. It's something that has to build up. You have to allow it to get momentum. It's something that you have to practice. Now, I will get to it in a little bit, but it's something that we typically don't practice because it's not something that we're inherently taught. Second myth is this whole notion of thin air. So you hear people say often, oh my gosh, she just pulled that idea out of thin air. How did that come to her? Or this whole idea of divine inspiration. And that certainly is a way that a lot of creative people work. And it happens to us all. A lot of times we get to work, we're struggling, we're thinking through ideas, and sometimes inspiration just hits you. It just comes to you. And we can't really explain where it came from or what happened. And that does happen, but that's not a reliable way to look at things. Now, you have to understand that any artistic endeavor, whether it's photography, whether it's illustration, whether it's writing, whether it's dance, theater, film, you name it, any creative act has form and it has function. And what we do happens between those boundaries. So we really can't exist without the idea of form or function. However, you will see people who are creative outside of form or function just for the sake of doing something new. So for instance, I used to work in an art museum. You see this a lot in contemporary art. Okay, I'm just going to take a bunch of white canvases, we'll paint them on the wall, and they are my white paintings. So I have done something different. It's the anti-painting. It is the lack of painting. It is the opposite of painting. Well, let me be honest with you. That was easy, and it was also stupid because there's no reason for it. And that's the kind of stuff that gives creativity a bad name. It's stuff that gives art a bad name, and quite frankly, it shouldn't exist at all. Sorry, I had to get that out of my system, but I'm very adamant about that because if you have a creative idea that exists without any reason, without any form, without any function, without any solution that it's providing to anything, then it doesn't mean anything. It's just easy. It's easy to say, I'm going to do something new and I'm going to do something different, but if there's no reason for it to exist, then it's not worth it anyway. A lot of times you will hear people refer to this as problem solving, this whole idea of creative thinking. So we are problem solving. And I remember early on in my development, I thought that was a really absurd term because it's like problem solving, like there's a math problem or like the house is burning down or like somebody's car broke or the dog got out or like what is a problem? Well, those are severe problems, but what we're talking about is within the parameters of form and function of our art form. And in our case, it's going to be photography. We're looking for new ways to approach things. So maybe it's new ideas or a new way to approach shooting portraits, for instance. It's new ways of interpreting a still life, or maybe new ways of composing, or maybe it's new ways of looking at lighting, new ways of using flash techniques, new ways of composition. It could be any of these things that we talk about. So those are within parameters, and if you're just looking for a new way to do something, then you have a problem that you are trying to solve. And so a lot of times you will hear people talk about that, and that's what that refers to. This is all going to lead up into our next photo assignment. Now, we are not there yet, but I wanted to talk about creative thinking and at least open this discussion with you guys. I want to refer you to someone else that I think is one of the big leaders in this space, a gentleman by the name of Edward de Bono. Edward de Bono is a Maltese physician slash philosopher who did a lot of work and a lot of writing and a lot of research that went into this whole idea of creative thinking, starting probably back in the 60s, 70s. He has many books on it, but the book that I would recommend is one called Lateral Thinking. The idea behind lateral thinking is that de Bono divides the way we inherently learn things as we're growing up into two types of thought. We have vertical thinking and lateral thinking. It's probably worth doing a whole video on lateral thinking, but let me give you the gist of it. So two types of thinking: vertical, which is more traditional. It's the way most of us are taught to think when we're growing up and when we're in school. And then there's lateral thinking. So the idea behind vertical thinking is that our brains are taught and stored information in a stacked type formation where it is designed to be efficient and recalled in a very short amount of time. It works really well with the human brain, and it does not allow us to ask a lot of questions. It just gives us a procedure to move forward. A lot of work environments are going to deal with vertical thinking because we're working under deadline. We want to be efficient. So these things happen in this sequential order, and this is how this information is all stored together, and we're able to recall it and execute it fairly quickly. Lateral thinking is the kind of flip side of this, obviously, but it's taking things out of the context of coming up with a solution at the end, but it's a whole act of picking things apart and questioning every part, resequencing, reorganizing, introducing random ideas in order to discover what works or what doesn't, and possibly have an outcome of a model that's more efficient than the first one that we started with. And so lateral thinking is about sitting back, taking time. It's much more creative in nature. And so these are two different approaches to things. Vertical thinking is not designed to be creative. It's designed to move things forward. Lateral thinking is designed to question things. De Bono is not a photographer or an artist, but this is a really interesting way of looking at things because he was a little controversial in his day, but the whole idea of this new way of looking at things in order to come up with innovative solutions to things can transcend to major world problems. And he's made some wacky suggestions to things, but I think he has a really good case for a lot of it, because what we need to do is we need to shake up the traditional way of thinking if we expect any new outcome. If we expect new outcome from doing things the same way every time, it's just never going to happen. And what's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. A lot to think about. I want to hear what you guys have to say, so make sure you drop me a comment below. We're going to continue with this in coming videos. This will lead to the next photo assignment. I will see you guys in the next video. Until then, later.